We have sunk their Navy. We have set them back years upon years upon years in terms of what they would like to do to be able to export terror around the world. The final thing is, can you get to a deal where you can guarantee to the American people no nuclear weapons for these butchers? If we get there, that is a victory. And I think if we get there soon, the American people will see that as a good thing.
He thinks he can use pressure tactics like he did in Venezuela. Like
Which
he's
worked.
doing. Like he's doing, they didn't
Well, this
work.
is a very different country.
He took Maduro out, but there's still political prisoners there, and a lot of the
Alex Saab was just
Venezuelans. So do not
today.
claim that Venezuela is a victory.
Please like, subscribe, and share. In today's video, Ana Navarro clashes with Scott Jennings on CNN Newsnight, with Abby Phillip as tensions rise over Donald Trump's low approval ratings and the Iran conflict. Ana Navarro fires back with sharp facts, while Scott Jennings faces mounting pressure defending the administration. To major midterm losses faced by leaders like Richard Nixon and George W. Bush, the debate heats up amid growing concerns over gas prices and global instability. So, let's dive in.
Trump's handling of the war in Iran. Those numbers are very similar to his handling of the job as a whole, with 65% of people disapproving. Will this go to help him or hurt him as he's continuing to do this thing where he says, I'm going to attack, okay, now I'm not going to attack, and it's all been done sort of to the public, but not to Congress? Peter?
No, it's been done to the public, but that is also the fact that we're not sitting in the negotiation rooms, and whether that's happening in Islamabad, whether that's happening with emissaries from Qatar, from Oman, or whether that's in other channels that the U.S. has, we're only seeing the tip of this much more delicate regional and specific picture. Frankly, time is very much not on the Iranian side from their longevity as a regime. Time is also not on this administration side just when it comes to gas prices in the midterm. So the fact that the president is holding off, I think, does send a signal that there could be a far more significant development in the short term, especially coming on the heels of the president's trip to China, where Xi Jinping, very notably, and the Chinese government, Xi Jinping, does not like to get into domestic affairs of other countries because they don't want anyone talking about their Uyghur problem or anything else. Or I should say their horrific treatment of the Uyghurs and the human rights abuses. But Xi Jinping said Iran should not have a nuclear weapon. We agree on that component, and the Strait of Hormuz should be open. That's a very significant concession.
But he didn't offer anything to open.
What is he going to do?
Yeah, but let me challenge that.
They are suffering economically. The Chinese retail consumption was 3 points off expectations yesterday. It was 0.2%, barely grew year over year.
And there's a lot that China can do to pressure Iran.
Yeah.
I mean, including turning off their intel sharing with Iran to target American troops.
That would be
a big one.
Right. But right now, the Chinese are suffering from the closure of the Strait of Hormuz.
Of course.
Maybe not more than other folks in Asia, but certainly a heck of a lot more.
But I think this administration wanted to walk away from that summit with Xi Jinping with a win to say that, yes, the Chinese president is in fact going to put pressure on Iran. And they didn't get that.
There was additional daylight that grew up. While the Chinese, while Xi Jinping and Donald Trump were talking, the Iranians seized a Chinese flagged ship and impounded it. I mean, some of the messages coming out of Iran of like, this is a betrayal of the alliance that we had. I mean, that daylight, it may not be a mile wide, but if it was a crack, I mean, you can see to the other side.
I do want to mention that the Chinese Xi Jinping had said this before this meeting with Trump, that the Strait of Hormuz should be open. Obviously, China's suffering as well, in a much bigger way even than the United States. And, that they would like to see a closure to this war.
But the nuclear component and Iran not being a nuclear power, that was a significant development.
Cornell, how do you see this?
Please like, subscribe, and share. What makes this debate stand out is how it reflects the growing tension between public opinion, global strategy, and economic pressure. Recent national polls show that presidential approval during foreign conflicts often drops alongside rising energy prices. Historically, conflicts like the Gulf War and the Iraq War were followed by voter backlash tied to instability and high fuel costs. The international angle is just as important. China remains Iran's largest trading partner, buying a major share of Iranian oil through heavily sanctioned shadow fleet networks monitored by maritime intelligence groups. That gives Beijing influence, but also creates risks as China faces slowing growth, weak consumer demand, and continued property market instability. Another major concern is the Strait of Hormuz, which carries nearly 20% of the world's oil supply. Any disruption there can quickly drive up inflation, shipping costs, and global food prices, which is why multiple U.S. administrations have treated the region as a top strategic priority. Inside Iran, international organizations continue reporting mass arrests, political crackdowns, and restrictions on civil liberties, keeping global pressure at the center of negotiations. Beneath the political arguments, the bigger issue is how fragile global energy markets and regional power struggles are influencing decisions in real time.
War is being handled, because Americans are very, very concerned about it, especially since it's gone on far longer than they were expecting, than they were told.
You know, I always try to look at the world through the lens of the least of these, the people who are suffering the most vulnerable. And so when I look in Iran, I see people dealing with execution, subjugation, domination, repression. They're human beings like anybody else. I say the same thing about Gaza and genocide. I say the same thing about black folk in Harlem. Same thing about poor whites in Kentucky. There's got to be a moral and spiritual lens. And when you look through the world through moral and spiritual lens, which for me as a Christian, look at the world through the lens of the cross, it looks like you're always headed toward crucifixion, because they're the ones who get crucified for the most part. You see, the everyday people, the poor people, and so we see the gangsters at the top manipulating, playing power politics, crushing the people in their own respective contexts, and we end up with a dialogue that's deodorized at the top, that hiding the funk of the suffering and the unbelievable blood that's flowing. So in that sense, I have a critique across the board, but when I see the war, it's an illegal, it's an immoral war, but at the same time, I see an immoral regime in Iran. You see?
You're saying two things can be true at the same time.
Two things can be true at the same time.
How is this going to play out, you think, if this war continues to linger on? Obviously, the gas prices and all the cost of the war to the American public, to the regular person, hitting pretty hard. How do you see this playing out for the midterms? Do you think it's going to...
It's not good for Republicans. It's not good for Trump. I mean, the numbers don't lie, and the numbers have been fairly consistent. I don't know how many regular Americans who are trying to put food at the table, who are taking care of their children, who are working 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet, are really following every development of this war. I think most people are like, just wake me up when it's over, and it's not over. Every day it lingers on more and more. I also think, you know, when I see and read these threats by Trump, it's a little reminiscent of Taco, right? Trump always chickens out. It's a little, this is the same guy who threatened Iran with complete eradication of their civilization during the Easter weekend. So it's like the little president who cried wolf a little too much. And I think something we can all agree on is that the messaging around this war has been disorganized, undisciplined, and not very effective. And I think that this zigzagging and threatening and screaming, you know, at the kids in the yard by Trump doesn't help the messaging issue.
Do you think it's been disorganized and the messaging just kind of all over the place?
Look, I think the president's been pretty clear. His number one objective is he does not want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. That's been his top priority. He said it again today. He says it virtually every day. He didn't really make a political decision. He made a national security decision, which is what we elect commanders-in-chief to do. He decided that they were on the brink of getting a nuclear weapon. He wasn't going to permit it. It's his red line, and he is enforcing it. And he's really sort of set politics aside. I mean, the polling is pretty clear on it, but he has kind of set politics aside and said, I can't worry about politics all the time. Sometimes I have to worry about national security, and that's his choice. And a lot of this rests on his shoulder. Respectfully, if I might disagree regarding chickening out, I don't think the top level of the Iranian regime that we took out in the opening hours of this war would think that he chickened out. Probably don't see it that way right now. We inflicted massive military damage against the top layer of Iranian leadership, against their military sites, and so on and so forth. We have sunk their navy. We have set them back years upon years upon years in terms of what they would like to do to be able to export terror around the world. The final thing is, can you get to a deal where you can guarantee to the American people no nuclear weapons for these butchers? If we get there, that is a victory, and I think if we get there soon, the American people will see that as a good thing.
He thinks he can use pressure tactics like he did in Venezuela, like
Which
he's
worked.
doing. Like he's doing, they didn't
Well, this
work.
is a very different country.
He took Maduro out, but there's still political prisoners there, and a lot of
Alex
the
Saab was just
Venezuelans.
extradited
So do not
today.
claim that Venezuela is a victory. It's not. It's yet,
Trump's
you
got
know,
an 80% approval rating in Venezuela right now.
that's not true. And let me just tell
it's
you
true,
this.
yeah.
Let me tell you this. The woman who was, the party who was legally elected in Venezuela is
Delcy
somewhere out in
Rodriguez.
exile because he has
Marina.
made a pact with Maduro's number two. And Maduro's worst executors are still running around free in Venezuela, terrorizing the Venezuelan people. There are still political prisoners. But he thought that he could, you know, he used all sorts of scare tactics with Venezuela. He's using all sorts of scare tactics to tighten the screws on Cuba. But those are, you know, smaller countries without a real military and really not much of an option but to fold. Iran is a completely different game, and I think these scare tactics of his just are not having the same effect because they have an incredible tolerance, more than I thought they would have, of enduring pain and pressure.
You know, butchery. You got butchery in Gaza. You got butchery on the West Bank. You got butchery in Tehran. You got butchery going on. If all we're doing is just butchery, is butchery all the way down. What does that mean? It's over. People reach a point where they have a contempt for humanity. We no longer have the capacity to express love, care, and concern for others, let alone the least of these. That's what's sad. It's butchery all the way down, though, brother.
But in our case, we're taking on the butchers. The case of
No, but
Iran's
America
regime,
has this history of butchery, too.
They butcher their own people. They drag them out into the street.
That's
They
true.
hang them. They
That's
behead
true.
them.
40,000 this year.
If women
That's true.
don't wear the right clothes, or they take
true.
off their.
That's exactly
I mean,
right. We got
it's-
butchery and
it's
slavery and
terrible.
Jim Crow and lynching. We got butchery in Gaza. You got butchery in Venezuela. You got, this is Jonathan Swift all the way down, all right? We're on the way to misanthropy.
Should we have looked the other way on Iran?
I think that we could come up with ways of minimizing.
Please like, subscribe, and share. What really stands out here is the growing gap between military victories and actual geopolitical stability. History shows that even major battlefield losses do not always force governments into political compliance. Research from organizations like Rand Corporation has repeatedly found that external military pressure can strengthen regime resilience when leaders use nationalism to consolidate internal support. There is also the humanitarian dimension. Groups such as Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International continue to report that civilians often bear the heaviest burden from sanctions and prolonged conflicts, while political elites remain insulated. In many cases, that weakens the intended effect of pressure campaigns and can empower more hardline factions instead. On the economic side, disruptions around the Strait of Hormuz remain a major global concern because nearly 20% of the world's oil supply moves through that corridor. Even limited escalation can trigger spikes in fuel prices, inflation, transportation costs, and food prices worldwide, which is why central banks and financial markets react so cautiously to tensions in the region. Meanwhile, experts connected to the International Atomic Energy Agency continue warning that once a country approaches nuclear breakout capability, military pressure alone becomes far less predictable. At that stage, diplomacy, inspections, and long-term negotiations often become more important than short-term escalation or political signaling. So beneath this debate, the deeper issue is not just military strategy. It is the constant tension between force, humanitarian consequences, economic stability, and the limits of imposing political change on highly centralized governments. Pause. Are you tired of only getting half the story from partisan news coverage? One outlet says one thing, another says the exact opposite, and it becomes harder to know what's actually true. That's where ground news comes in. It allows you to compare how left, right. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.